so well, she's now off camera.
I'm just going to assume it is live. I guess I should check on my phone if it's live.
Yeah,
Hang
there's
on.
a little box here that says live.
Yeah.
15 seconds.
Let's go onto LinkedIn and have a look.
I should have asked before, Vinay. Where are we streaming?
We're streaming onto LinkedIn and we're streaming onto YouTube. Because I'm such a good marketeer, I've done a terrible job of actually marketing it, and no one's going to watch it live, which is good because, let's be honest, it's about people in this room. That's what it's about.
Well, we have
James
at least
here.
one viewer. James says it's live, and I might be reading too much of the exclamation mark, but he says it's epic. So
okay, it's live and it's epic, and we've just started. Saloni's disappeared. She's fucking invisible. That's how future we are.
Are you allowed to swear live on LinkedIn? Is that the?
We're allowed to. It's our show. It's our party. We can do what we want.
Yes. I was just getting water.
Hey girl, hey.
Hey.
This is so fun. Oh, Julius is gonna ruin it now, isn't he? This dude energy. I was gonna say like what a triumphant gal trio this is. But
Saloni, do you wear glasses ever?
Huh?
Do you wear glasses ever?
Yeah.
No, I got LASIK.
Oh, there was a memo, Saloni.
We were hoping you'd have glasses on too.
Oh my god.
Maybe Julius will have glasses and then we can get rid of Saloni and then we're all matching.
Oh my gosh, that's so mean.
I don't make the rules, Saloni. I just ruthlessly enforce them.
Okay.
I mean, I just wear glasses for the majority of my life. But
should we kick off? I feel like Julius is going to eventually make his
Let's kick off. Okay, so brief introduction to the people who are watching who know what it is anyway, but it feels nice to do it. So Backed Startup Support / Office Hours. Still haven't really worked out what the title should be, but it's our show. We can call it what we like. So this is really about coming together with founders to problem solve with the Backed community's help. So anything from product, fundraising, marketing, sales. Tom's got some really amazing questions. I was like, oof, punchy. We actually had to do a serious episode, which is great. But essentially the ethos behind it is good people, which is you people, good vibes, which is also you people, and no bullshit, which is probably the bit where I shut up and let you guys actually do the work. So this time we have Tom Lawrence with us from an awesome startup called MVPR. I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a second, but first let's do a quick round robin of who's who, also for Tom's benefit really. Daisy, why don't you start?
My name is Daisy. I work with Backed, with Vinay and a few other people, and I would say with Pascal if he hadn't flaked today because he's a terrible person. And I run network at Backed, which means trying to source the ecosystem of people who are in this industry and might be willing to be friends with Backed and help it do things like find deals and win those deals and support portfolio companies post-investment. And then alongside that, I also run our D&I strategy on the investment side and try to make sure that of the 10 or 15 investments we can do in a year, there's like pretty broad representation of people that's reflective of how, potential is spread across the world. That's me.
Abby, go for it.
Okay, I'm Abby. I do two things. So I work at TechNation. So I'm the program lead for Libra, which is our first ever underrepresented founder program, skill program. Super excited about that. TechNation is a massive organization. We do so many different elements, but I sit on the growth program side. So I help scale startups in the UK and beyond. And also I'm one of the co-founders at Community Growth Ventures, so CGV, where we invest in underrepresented founders. We come super early, friends and family size, ticket sizes, backing amazing founders. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I love that I've brought you guys a white male founder to problem solve with.
I know. It's just like
it's so rare and special now. I'm like, oh, it's one in the wild.
Oh.
I think it's lovely.
Saloni, hit us up because you work with C, and that's also a female focused fund. So this is
no hate, right? But I also wear a couple of different hats. So my day job, I work on the investment team at Founders Factory, where I look after investments across B2B and consumer. And then I've been angel investing primarily in female-led businesses for the last 3 to 4 years, formerly a startup operator, and then also work with C on the platform. We run a platform for female-led businesses. So, but no discrimination. It is actually not that often that I'm on a call with a white male founder these days. So yeah.
And you actually,
I think that's fantastic.
Is it you or is it Trin that's already spoken with Tom before? Because I know that actually there's a relationship.
I think it's
I've spoken with Trin.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Otherwise,
well,
I would have definitely raised my hand.
Tom,
Sorry,
last but not least, go for it.
No, it's a real privilege. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to kind of triaging our woes and our challenges. Yeah, so my background has been working with, initially I started working in kind of data, worked in PR for the last sort of 7-8 years. Most recently at Edelman, which is the largest PR company in the world, and I helped them set up their offering for startups. Turned out to be kind of slightly later stage startups, rather than the earlier stage ones that we're focused on now. And then, yeah, set up MVPR, started that December last year, with a view to, so I mean, essentially, in a nutshell, we help kind of founders, early stage companies communicate with the press better by kind of putting data into putting data feedback into the kinds of conversations you're having with journalists. I was always frustrated that there was never any kind of validated learning metrics in PR. You would always rely on, a freelancer or an advisor to help. And yeah, with a data background, that was pretty frustrating. And so I kind of begun to look at how we can put, kind of fast feedback loops into conversations with journalists so that ultimately you can remove somebody like me from the equation in the future. Just see how journalists are engaging with your content and then use that in order to inform your comms in the future. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
Cool. Quick question. Did you guys get the business? You want Tom to go through an example of how it works? Or...
Yeah, an example would be awesome because I feel like I get it in theory, and I also know how shitty it is to sort of try and navigate PR on your own when you're not like hyper connected. So I get the pain point, but I'm not sure I actually understand what it does.
Tom, give us a little example of how someone might use MVPR.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, typically I work with founders who don't know. I mean, PR is a black box, right? Most people don't know about how to communicate with journalists. People see articles come out of TechCrunch and they're like, oh, we want to be in TechCrunch because, it's great for investment and, ultimately will drive the brand value in the business and maybe even kind of deliver some actual ROI. But people don't necessarily know how to pitch journalists to TechCrunch or even what journalists at TechCrunch want to receive from them. And I use TechCrunch because it's the broad example of any kind of publication that somebody would want to get into. And so essentially, I think if you think of PR as like push and pull, you have the push side of PR, which is where you want to share information with journalists about stuff that you want to talk about. And then there's the pull side of PR, which is kind of lesser well known, which is where actually journalists will ask you for questions. And that's, I think, an element of PR that actually a lot of founders just don't know about. And so we help with both sides. On the one hand, we basically help startups structure their messaging in a really clear visual way, and then share that information with journalists. And then we call it a press page. Essentially, it's just a bit like you would have on Crunchbase, for example, except with a lot of the questions that journalists would typically ask you up front when you start a business. Except we know that you might not know what those questions would be, but we do because we've literally encountered them time and time again and answered them over email. So we stick all of that content that journalists want to see in one place, and then every single time we share that content, we use pretty accurate tracking in order to see exactly then how journalists engage with your content, and then we show that back to you so that in the future, when you're thinking about writing to a journalist, you're not thinking, oh, what topics do I pitch and which founders should I provide for an interview? You can literally see which founders they've engaged in and you can also see which topics they've engaged in from the content that you've already put on MVPR. And so that's the kind of, I would always say that's the starting point of PR, is you sharing information in a really clear visual way with journalists. And then, there are layers on top of that. Like, we facilitate journalists to come to you with requests for comment. So if they're looking for an expert opinion on, say, I don't know, future of driverless cars in 2025, and you have a mobility company, we'll pair that request and we'll bring that journalist into you, and you can then actually respond. And so you're already providing information to a journalist they've literally asked you for, so that that they're interested in the first place.
And the powerful thing is you actually also are able to, as a founder, create kind of template or generic responses to key trends or key questions within that sector. So if a journalist is looking for future mobility-based quotes from founders, and you're a founder in the mobility space, the journalist can actually just pluck one of your quotes already and just run with it, and it will be attributed back to you. So it kind of takes away your need to customize that stuff, which I think also is a super powerful aspect of it. It's kind of removing the friction. Yeah.
I'm glad you think so, Vinny. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's about removing the friction from both sides. On the one hand, the problem is startups don't necessarily know how to communicate, or when or how, with journalists. And then on the flip side, you've got, literally hundreds of journalists. There are, fewer and fewer journalists every year, especially during the pandemic. But yet the amount of content's gone up by 30% in the last year. So you've got less journalists with less time to write more articles, and typically the length of articles also increasing. And so actually you've got a situation where you've got a bunch of companies, and really interesting companies with stories to share, but then you've also got journalists that haven't got any time to source their articles properly. And so MVPR was a really obvious thing to do, whereby we put really interesting content in one place with a bunch of people who are hungry for it, make sure it's shareable immediately, and provide access on both ends. And so we're essentially a marketplace whereby journalists are able to go and search for content live, which means they're no longer reliant on, basically what happens at the moment is pinging a bunch of services and hoping that somebody comes back to you with a comment, or receiving way too many comments and then having to work through your emails to work out what's good and what's not. And so we become kind of a matching service. And so we bring it all to one platform, make it very accessible for journalists to search for content in real time, and make it possible for startups to share information with journalists in a really visual way.
Cool. That makes total sense.
It does?
Selena was confused. She's like, what has this guy been saying for the last 15 minutes?
No. Literally, what's PR?
I need this.
Can somebody please tell me?
Everywhere.
No, so can I ask a question? So
Yeah, sure.
I guess I'm more asking around I know you're a marketplace, and so you have two sets of customers, but who do you consider your primary customers? And then the second question I have is, what's the sort of main use case that you're serving for? Or solving for rather? Is it for the startups that want access to the PR side, or is it more for journalists that want comments from companies? So,
our primary customers are startups. As startups right now, we're actually working with a couple of, so it's typically our customers at the moment are pre-seed through to about Series B. We're working with a couple of pre-IPO stage companies just to mature the product, develop something a little bit, ultimately more mature for slightly larger companies who see us more as a data hub, for example, that they might link into if they've got a number of agencies across Europe, for example. But I can come on to that a bit later. So at the moment, it's entirely company focused. We will never charge journalists for this service because ultimately they won't pay for it, and they're not used to paying for stuff like this. And actually, in order to provide value on both sides, you're absolutely right. We need to serve both in equal parts, but we're initially a SaaS company, or that's at least how I think about ourselves, because we're very much focused on, startups all the way kind of through from pre-seed through to kind of, as I said, kind of up to pre-IPO now. And then we obviously have journalists on the platform, but we don't need journalists on the platform in order to actually be able to provide value to the startups, because journalists will use, really they use 4 different mediums. From mostly it's email. Occasionally you'll have to contact a journalist on WhatsApp. They use Telegram now. and Twitter. And so by hooking into all of the platforms that already exist, we kind of hack the other side of the marketplace, because we don't need journalists to actually come to MVPR to provide them with the information and match them up. We've already got ways of contacting them. And so we piggyback on the back of email and Twitter initially. And then, of course, there's this natural migration that happens whereby, journalists discover that they can come to MVPR to search for really interesting content from startups. And so we kind of build in that behavior as it goes. And so, at the moment, where we've got sort of nearly 20 odd startups on the platform, that's not enough to suck a journalist across. But as we onboard lots and lots more startups, and ambition is at the end of next year to get to over 1,000, journalists will begin to come automatically to MVPR, because they'll know they'll be able to find what they're looking for. And so that's how we build in that behavior. But initially, we're focused on startups.
And Tom, by the way, sorry for joining late. I'm Julius. Good to meet you. And I've been getting into, not saying getting into the PR game, but like I knew nothing about PR 6 months ago. I know almost nothing about PR now. So I made like this little way into the PR world. And now I'm wondering what, as a startup of a pre-seed size, so maybe it's 2 people around a desk, or we're 170 people and we have considerable budget. How do you structure the pricing? I can see, paying maybe a small retainer just to use the platform, and then there's some transactional element, but like how does that scale up with my budget that I might have at my disposal, but you don't know that?
Yeah, so I mean, typically, when I speak with founders at, say, the pre-seed stage, who've maybe raised like anywhere between say 500K up to 2 million, the kinds of, and I encountered this literally every day when I was working at Edelman, whereby Edelman doesn't really they don't take startups that only want to pay sort of £1,000 or £2,000 a month. That just doesn't happen, and neither do boutique agencies either. And so really, what startups of that kind of size are left with is having to either rely on goodwill, or alternatively working with freelancers and copywriters as they bring in and out. Mm-hmm. And so at the small end of the stage, and this is where you're going to come on to this is the challenge that we have now, because we automate so much of what is traditionally done by junior people in PR companies, in PR agencies. We're effectively a self-service platform with all of the knowledge that I have and all of the knowledge that our kind of advisors have built into the platform. So all the strategic advice and stuff like that is very much designed into the user experience. Now, obviously, we have strategic service on top of that as well. But at the very, very early stage of things, we can, because it's on software, we can afford for the price to be quite low. And in comparison, say like where you might be paying £1,000 a month for a freelance copywriter to have them for 2 days a month, or potentially just about 3 days a month if you find a cheap one. We're actually charging £100 a month. It's actually £90 a month for kind of the same access. And then we have success fees built on top of that, but you're very unlikely to breach the £1,000 a month mark, even if you get a couple of pieces of coverage in the press, which is far more than a freelancer would even be able to guarantee you with 2 days a month. And so at the moment, it's about traction and growth. That's what I care about. I want as many startups on the platform as possible, and I want to provide the best service possible to customers. Now, and that means that, I know from not necessarily the ease in which that we've managed to onboard customers, but quite a lot of our now incoming customers are coming from existing customer referrals from people who you literally use the platform, and it's a basic platform. It's not complex tech yet.
Don't tell them.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's very complex tech. But it's not. It's a simple platform, and I had not expected to get so many referrals in from existing customers. You always think that
I can totally see that. If you're telling me you're basically reducing the price by 10x, that's extremely meaningful, especially for someone on the lower end of the budget. Right? I have many clients, and I've worked with PR freelancers, where I'm like, okay, what, 3,000 a month as a retainer, and I don't get any guarantee on the outcome.
Yeah, and that's usually the minimum. Right? 3,000 is usually as a standard rate, the minimum that someone will work, and then your account will actually be serviced very little, even on that money, because for a whole bunch of reasons, which is why the agency model is broken. But I think let's dive into it, because Tom had a really personal question related to this, which was, why don't you say it, Tom? It was about pricing. So
it was.
We're basically talking about how you might be underpriced.
I was talking, yeah. Well. So I mean, and this is the point: is that I thought, Julius, that's what you were aiming at. To be honest, this is this is kind of the point where, like, I mean, I knew that this was an underserved market because I experienced it, but and I also knew kind of, obviously we have our kind of 3, 5, 8 year roadmaps. I know how much money we need to make in order to be sustainable. But I also know that because we're technology backed, we can afford to really bring the price down quite significantly. And it's very difficult for me to know what the markers are of kind of, how do you know that you're pricing too little or too much? And I know when you said, I can see it's compelling that you bring the price down by 10x. That's great for me, but we want to bring down the barrier to entry to PR, because that's what we're about as a company.
Okay. So let's do it then. So the question here is essentially,
sorry,
when you're creating a new market, all good, man. When you're creating a new market that hasn't really been priced properly before, what are the markers that tell you that you are undercharging? Like, how can Tom gauge whether he's undercharging or not, and actually where his price should be at, without doing damage to trust or shit going wrong in that process, basically?
I want to jump in and share an example from my work. My work is not technology. My work as a coach is not technology enhanced right now. But I've recently increased my prices. Why did I do that? Because I asked every single potential client, before I got in touch with, before I personally got on the phone with them or met with them, just to do an initial session and see if the chemistry is right. If they were willing to pay the price that I'm normally charging, and every single one said yes. And I wondered, because I have limited capacity, right? So if every single one says yes, then the value that they associate with that service apparently is higher than the price I'm charging. So I only need a certain number of clients. And so what about I bring the price level up to the point where I get exactly that amount of clients? So that's what I did. I increased the price by, I don't know, 25%. From one day to the other, and I just watched, and I saw, okay, so there's like one person out of 4 now who says that's maybe not what it is, and there's still people who say, okay, that's fair. Now the difference between you and me is, you can effectively accept unlimited amounts of clients, right? Because you're not unlimited, but like I have 24 hours in the day, and some of those I need to sleep. So my number of clients is super limited. Now, I want to give you another perspective. If I, through your service, get PR and I gain a client, that's a basket size, a 4-figure basket size, normally 4 figures. So if that comes on a $2,000 investment, that's normally already profitable for me, right?
Yep.
If you now give me that on a $300 investment, it's wildly profitable for me. So, so if you understand what the return on PR work is for the type of clients, I'm just one individual case now. If you understand what the return on those clients is, then you can start pricing it.
I think there's something implicit in what you've just said there, Judas. It's like important to consider, which is like, what is it that you want to do with this company? Like, what's the constraining factor that helps you like answer that question? Because there's no objectively right answer. So it's either this is the cap on who we can service and this is what they're willing to pay. It's I want to build a company of X scale and X size, but in order to do that, then I should be looking at this kind of revenue figures after a year or 2 years. And to do that, I would have to be charging this amount because this is the actual number of customers that I can reasonably expect to both acquire and like sustainably service. Or is it just, I want this to be the most widely used tool, or it's like a mission driven thing. And you're like, I want everyone to have access to this. And in which case, then it becomes what is the barrier to entry? Oh, sorry, what is the cutoff point at which point there would be people meaningfully excluded from the service I'm trying to like put out? So I guess that's the question, right? Is it a venture scale business, or even with or without taking venture money, is it aiming to be that size of business? Is it aiming to be a sustainable like company that you run for like as a lifestyle business? Is it just, this is what I want to do with myself? So like, what is the version of it that means that I don't have to overextend myself or like change my lifestyle? Like thinking about Julius, and there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so much I actually want to do. And so I'd almost start with that question first, and then we can sort of work backwards from there.
Yeah, I want like very much doing this as a venture scale opportunity. I think in the terms of in the way that we've modeled it, we'll look to have about 10,000 customers by the end of year 5, and that gives us roughly sort of 90 million recurring revenue, ARR. Sorry, and that's the perspective we have. I mean, I can't bring my model up right now. Well, I can, I suppose, but I won't. But in terms of of kind of how many customers. No, go on. You know more than I do, so I'll let you speak. I've answered your first question.
You absolutely have. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say then in that case, if you are playing sort of, there's both venture scale, but not necessarily taking the traditional path of venture, like, Zapier became a huge company, but they didn't want to raise recurring rounds. And so it was important that they price in all the cash that they would need for growth into their pricing model. But then there's also I am definitely taking in venture money at the like requisite stages, in which case what matters is the metrics that you can show in terms of scale and growth. And then so it's much less important how much actual revenue you're taking in at the beginning and much more just your reach. And so that's the other sort of piece of trade-off. Is it a sort of venture scale company, but not necessarily with venture, with the inflection points that are traditionally venture is built on, or venture scale, but that is also the path that you want to take? Because I think that contributes again to making the decision.
Right.
And I think
especially for the second path, you are subjected to a level of growth that you won't be able to produce on your own, right? If you tell me you want to have 10,000 customers by year 5, I'm thinking that probably means that you will have to expand into other countries, or expand into, you won't be only serving startups, so your customer persona will change over time. And then I'm wondering, okay, so how much do you know about this other customer persona? I now understand your business, and it's quite attractive to me personally as a business, as a potential client, right? But if you were to approach a larger kind of mid-sized company somewhere in the backcountry of Germany, maybe they wouldn't understand, or maybe you wouldn't be able to approach them. And that would be the kind of company that you would have to target as a venture scale opportunity.
Possibly. Then again, I'm also like, how many startups are there in the UK? Because sometimes I feel like it's a very small number. Sometimes I feel like it's everybody at once. And so there might be literally 1 million, and in which case 10,000 would be a very small fraction of that. But I'm curious about like we're digressing slightly, so we can also just park this and come back to it. But I am actually curious about how you're thinking about what you would have to do in order to reach that customer volume, because I don't know that you couldn't build that in the UK.
So, I mean, I'm going to answer the question in 2 parts. So firstly, we will go to the US as fast as possible. So in terms of the PR market globally, the US market's roughly 4 times the size of the UK market. So the largest PR company in the UK is actually Edelman. By revenue, they do 80 million in revenue a year, and the US contingent does over 4 times that. And that's indicative of the US PR market versus the UK PR market. You also price slightly differently in the US than you do for the UK. It's a lot more expensive in the US than it is in the UK. In terms of the way Europe breaks down, then France is the 3rd largest market and Germany is the 4th. And so that's how it works. We probably wouldn't go to France or Germany because I don't think the markets are large enough in order to warrant actually going there. So building a footprint, moving to sort of 500K annual recurring revenue and then going straight to the US is exactly what we'll do, because I think that makes the most sense. In terms of how many startups there are, so startups is our first cohort, and that's how I'm thinking about this. So you've got pre-seed to Series A stage startups is literally who we're targeting at the moment, because I know there's a need and I know there's demand, and I know at the moment it's been extremely not easy. It never will be easy, but it's been, yeah, it's a short sales cycle into that level at the pricing point that we've got, and so it will scale. That's where we start, and startups is where we're at the moment. So there are about 100,000. I would consider 100,000 viable startups between the UK and the US right now, startups that we would want to work with. So basically companies that have raised more than 250K essentially, and that are venture backed. So typically we go after venture backed startups because it guarantees longevity, or to an extent anyway. Always.
Every investor in the room is like shuffling, like 40% of those.
I've said your name, so why don't we start with you? Anything you want to say about Tom's question in terms of working out markers for whether he is where he should place his pricing, whether he's underpriced or, yeah? What's your take?
Sorry, were you asking me?
Yes, I was asking you.
So yeah, I was going to ask actually a similar question to what was already raised, which was basically, if you're targeting just one stage of startup right now, is there a difference in the service that you would be providing to later stage startups? Does it cost you more? Does it require extra build? Like, what is, basically, I'm trying to figure out, like, can you tier your pricing? Because I'm sure you've thought about it, but is it justified to tier your pricing? Is it harder to actually service a larger, more advanced company, or is it the same? In which case they'd be like, excuse me, I'm not going to pay that much, you know?
So there are 2 parts to this. So so at the moment it's startups. So there are 3 streams of customers that we have. And the thing that to be honest, one of the main reasons that I built this was, not the main reason, but a really strong reason that I built this was that I could see the product in its like nascent form, in its very basic form. And actually, I don't need to create anything new. We're just building on top in a really structural way. And so we start with a product for startups, and then we build into SMEs, like larger SMEs that might have, between 20 people and 200 people. And so we're not just looking at that stage, we're not just looking at venture-backed startups. And once we build that product, which is almost exactly the same as the product for startups, we then move into serving freelancers and agencies. And the product for freelancers and agencies is again, starts with this core that we've got for startups, and that's where the data collection comes in, and the automation comes in. And you're right, for the agencies, it's about optimizing internal operations. And so we're actually reducing the cost of agencies by automating PR processes, and we're removing their need for junior members of the team. And we're allowing smaller agencies to scale. I mean, ultimately, we want to take a huge bite out of the boutique PR agency market. That's the place that we want to just consume. And then it's true. It is true. And that requires, the boutique agency market requires a slightly expanded model on the product, rather on the stuff that's built on the middle. And then you have the large agencies, your Edelmans, your Weber Shandwicks of the world, and they need, again, you have a little bit, so actually we've already designed this product already. James, who's on this call, fantastic. He's done a great job of designing that. And so we have a really clear idea of kind of the breadth that takes us up to working with large agencies. And then there's a step further, and then we're working with large companies. And actually, everybody uses MVPR as the infrastructure on which they build their PR. And the product is, I mean, the core product that we've got at the minute remains in each of those products for each of those, say, 3 streams. I'm thinking sort of startup and SME being one stream, agencies being the second, and freelancers, and the third being large businesses. Yes, Julius.
I have a question. When I asked you about when I talked about my capacity, and I said yours was probably unlimited, you were like, so I wonder if that's the case, and we're also assuming that you have a tiered model you're building over time, and still you have limited capacity, then just for kind of pricing and commercial reasons, you will move upstream. It's something that I see, right? I understand now that there are some companies that work with me that pay more, and so I have this natural pull of being like, okay, so I can take a customer who doesn't bring a lot of money, and I can take a customer who does bring a lot of money.
Yeah.
So what's the capacity limitation as you're scaling up and you build all those additional modules?
Well, at that stage, it's really about, I guess you're looking more on the kind of the softer side of the business, I think. It's account managers, it's sales directors, it's, at the enterprise SaaS level, we're past, so I mean, at the moment, our go-to-market strategy, which is working pretty well, it has to be said, is to go via VCs and plug into all of the VCs' portfolios. Now, that's fantastic and it's working well. But there's going to come a point where actually, as you say, as we've scaled up and we go for those slightly larger tickets, at the moment we'll have, so I think in my question, I talk about, when's the best time to bring in a head of sales? And, our go-to-market strategy at the moment means that I'm actually looking for a head of I have somebody earmarked for it already, but a head of partnerships. I'm looking for people to put partnerships in place with VCs while myself and perhaps one other person still goes after the direct sales. Because it's guaranteed rather than, partnership, which is, I always would say that it's better to just go to the person who's going to pay you than the person who's going to refer someone who'll pay you. Nonetheless, it's important to do both. But we are, as you say, going to get to that stage where we're going to be doing bigger tickets with much longer lead times and sales cycles. And so at that point, it's, actually not a case of have we got the technical ability in order to actually deliver what we promised, and, do we have the partnerships in place that guarantee those smaller companies coming in? But, literally, do we have enough salespeople in place to handle those demo calls, to handle all of the kind of infrastructure that goes with it, to do cold leads and reach out to, that's the bottleneck then at that stage. But I would,
okay. So I hear you say the limited capacity is actually on the go-to-market and sales side rather than on the product delivery side. So your product delivery or your value delivery is scalable.
Exactly. Yeah. That has to be the case. Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, we provide the infrastructure for which smart people build on. They add their skills to on top of.
You're a SaaS tool.
We're a SaaS tool. At the moment, yeah, exactly. At the moment, we're a couple of features put together for startups, but for agencies, will be a PR operating system. And as we spread our kind of reach out underneath all the companies, as you say, like, it's the genius of people that built on top of our tool that will do fantastic work. It's just so happens that we take a lot of the pain out of, doing the repetitive stuff and tracking actually, how successful they're being. We might provide data insight for kind of which journalists are publishing which articles and be able to guide people, literally live on which keywords to include in pitches so that they have a higher chance of getting published. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be the person who, they're going to see those keywords and decide whether to include them, and they're ultimately going to write the pitch. So
how do you feel in terms of the question on pricing? Because it seems though what we've said on that front, you want to do venture scale and you're ultimately planning to raise money, and the most important thing for your first cohort, at least the first half of your first cohort, which is startups, given that it's a self-serve tool and pretty limitless in terms of deployment, then just go for reach and growth and then leave the pricing at this super accessible no-brainer stage, because then that sets you up for showing the kinds of metrics that are super exciting to pull in more capital and then you can start moving then towards SMEs, which will need direct sales probably, and then start graduating to like PR agencies. I think the change in pricing then as you're going through those tiers will also make sense, because it becomes easier to work out the equivalent for that target group. Like, what is the thing that agencies are paying for that saves them a bunch of money, especially in terms of like headcount, that also delivers them X amount of revenue. And it'll be similar to what it is for startups, so just bumped up a level, and then ditto for enterprises, where the pricing, again, like Julia says, is far more about, this is an enterprise grade software. This is what we pay for these sorts of things. You are those sorts of things. You have all this track record from doing it elsewhere. And then, so I think that they will, the pricing will graduate, and it sounds like it won't necessarily even need to be tiered initially. It'll just evolve as that happens, and you add on, like, it's almost like a new product. What is a new product? It's just, that it's a slight variation of what you already do, but nobody else needs to know that. They just know it's a product now that you have launched for their archetype that wasn't previously there.
The evolution is much more the narrative over time.
Yeah.
And then you tell a different story to a different group of customers, which will then result in them buying it for a much higher price or a much lower price than this other group of customers, where the value at the core might be the same. I'm talking from experience here with my coaching product. That's what it is.
Cool. Let's get into another one, because I feel like we've done a lot of pricing.
Let's move the conversation forward. One of the other questions that Tom had was around co-founders, and Tom, you'd said that some investors have been asking you about bringing on a co-founder, and it's something you've been thinking about, but you were trying to think about how to build out your team, and kind of whether not having a co-founder was detractive. And then why don't you kind of unpack the question a little, and then Abby, I'd love you to answer, because otherwise I feel like you just haven't got the chance to show Tom any love so far.
You know that I'm awful at reading my own questions out. So we've already confirmed that. I've got 100% track record of being awful at doing this. So
okay, I have the same brain. But I'm doing this, and I'm like, oh, that's what it's like to listen to me.
I'm sure it's the same for me as well. I guess it boils down to, as you say, like, I don't always get this question, but sometimes it comes up, and investors will say, okay, we might get to the second or third stage of the conversation, and I'll be like, and what do you think about the board, and are you open to taking on co-founders, stuff like that? Like, is your first hire a CTO? And mostly my answer is, well, actually no. But then it kind of obviously engenders the question, is not having a CTO or a co-founder to be a balance, a detractor? Like, how is a VC thinking about this? Are they looking at me thinking, okay, a bit of a free radical solo entrepreneur? Is he actually going to listen to what we like, our advice, or is he actually just going to do whatever on earth he wants to do, and he's going to be uncontrollable, or not take on any good advice? And so I'm trying to kind of think of it from a VC's perspective, and I know fundamentally more heads is better than one always. But actually, that from my perspective at the moment, the way that I look at the business and the way that I look at we have fantastic people working for us already. If I look at our lead developer Marcel, he is brilliant, and he's exactly what we need right now. And in many ways, like, he has a couple of hats, and then I think James on the call, and I think we have Justine as well, who's also fantastic. And we're building really, really fast, and we're building a product that people are really enjoying using. And our customers are literally referring other people, even though we're at this super early stage. And so,
can I ask one point of clarification? Is the question like whether or not you should, and so how to find a co-founder, how to build one out, or is it you don't need one, but how do you respond to VCs who presume that you do? Because there's a different question.
Two different things. I'm reading the footnotes on Vinay's email right now that says don't ramble. So I'm going to keep cognizant of that.
It's fine. I just want to check that I'm following you down the rabbit hole that you're going, as opposed to thinking I am and you're going somewhere else. But those are okay if it's some combination of both, but I think that will obviously impact our answer.
Yeah, so I think I'm completely open to taking on co-founders at the right time. I think, there comes a moment where it's essential. But I don't feel like now is the right time. And I think that if it were going to be a co-founder, they'd have to bring something phenomenal to the table over and above just the skills. Because in terms of, where we are with even the product roadmap and, the way that we're thinking about customers, the way that we're thinking about kind of how we want to be as a business, we have a very, very clear vision that we're literally executing on. And so I'm really struggling to see what a co-founder would bring to that equation that we don't have already. Now, that might change in months or longer time. But from your perspective, how do you think about it? Say I've just described the example. You're a VC coming to the table, and you're thinking, what are you then thinking about me? What are you thinking? If you're suggesting that we should have a CTO, what's your reasoning behind that?
Okay, that makes sense.
I think I heard him, and I'm listening. I'm a listener. I don't really interject when I feel like I have nothing to say, because
you mean a polite person? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I just don't like wasting my voice. Like, I have limited voice capacity, honestly. But then, honestly, I think you already answered the answer yourself. I don't think you want a co-founder, and I don't think there is a specific need for having a co-founder for you to be successful at the end of the day. I feel like what investors do generally, and these are investors that are trying to, replicate what's happened before because they want their financial return, is they automatically go, oh, there's a pack matching. I see that generally a startup will be more successful if there's 2 or 3 behind the table. But at the same time, as we've seen, recently, Hopin, he's a solo founder. He did well. He became $1 billion company. So it's not going to stop you from being successful. And you're right. I don't think you need a particular skill to be a co-founder. What I think you should look at is more the soft skills, them having a multiple hat, because that relationship is going to be there for a long period of time compared to your current team. Because the stages that you're going to go through, especially when you're scaling, you're going to have incidents where certain people become redundant in their roles because you're now solving a different problem. So either you're going to be going through changes where your current team is able to change and go into that specific role at that time, or it's that time where they actually leave and you're now adding new people. You're going to be in that revolving door so many times. And this is talking from experience, because I work with loads of different companies that had companies from 10 people all the way to 2,000. And the stories I hear is crazy. You will see different people coming in, and you're basically just hiring people for the job to do compared to the job in the long run. But with a co-founder, what happens is that person is meant to be there for the long run. So you would generally need someone, and it sounds like I would look for maybe someone that has a sales side that could be there, because I think sales is something that will never become redundant and it's always needed. Someone that is the talker for you, so you're able to do the vision and that person is able to sell your vision. You would need to have someone, and this is talking from experience. So with Community Growth Ventures, we are 4 co-founders now, and we come from different experience. I sit on tech, so I'm very good on product and technical abilities and all that jazz. But at the same time, we're a family. So if you're not able to resolve your problems, and I promise you will bicker, chairs will be picked up, and not being able to resolve it, that's not a relationship that you want in the long run, right? So I hope
we're a remote team, so hopefully that won't happen. But if it does, it'll be embarrassing only for the person in the room. But sorry, go on. I didn't mean to
but then that's what you want. You want a safe space where you can have someone to vent. That is the co-founder in my eyes. Someone that you can talk to and have a honest conversation that's going to be there for the long run, because you're building something together. But if you don't find that, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't underpin whether you're going to be successful or not.
Yeah, I think we actually had a conversation about this recently, because so many of our founders are solo founders in the Backed portfolio, and we're talking about where is this myth even from, and does it reflect reality? And like Abby says, it's a pattern matching thing where there's in people's heads an overabundant picture of like team founders, and also an overabundance of pictures of solo founders that have sort of crashed and burned or whatever. But I think where the disconnect is we assume that co-founders will naturally do for each other what they have to or what they should do, which is what Abby is referring to. And they don't always by default, because lots of times people don't realize what a co-founder relationship is when they're getting into it, and they look either just for skill or who happens to be proximal, and they're like, okay, cool. And they aren't actually people who would have gone out of their way to become tribe, become family, and be deeply supportive of each other, or they don't complement each other in the ways in which they're different or deficient. They just happen to be two people collaborating on something, in the moment it's working, but it won't always. So what I'd say is so it seems like there's three things here. There's one, what do you say to VCs who are presuming that there is some deficiency because you don't have a founder? I think it's the either A, I don't feel like I need one because here is the village that essentially substitutes for what that one individual or two individuals would have to do. Here is the advisor that calls me on this thing. Here's this member of the team who does this part. But like, let that narrative actually be true, which ties into the second part. If you're actually still on the fence about whether you want a co-founder or not, and it's not a, sort of a done decision and it's about communicating, then what I would do is sit down and do like an ikigai, or like work with the coach, work with Julius, he's great, and sit down and figure out like, who are you? What are the things that you're really good at? What are the things you're terrible at? What are the things you really hate? And like map out what would complement for those things, because that's what a co-founder should be, is the person that you're not able to be, so that when you come for investment or at any challenge, it's like between the two or three or whatever of us, we are everything that is necessary to meet this challenge. But to do that requires doing that work and being honest with yourself. And then if through that you're like, oh, don't need a co-founder, I actually have this reflected in my board and my advisors and my whatever, then there's your answer. And that's all you have to communicate to VCs. VC is an assurance game and a reassurance game. So the questions are because they feel uncomfortable, but your answers can be what makes them comfortable, which is, here you go. Here's an articulation of why the thing that you're worried about is not actually the case. And then you're fine.
And you can turn that around in the conversation with the VC, but that's not limited to the co-founder question.
Yeah.
You can pause and ask, what will make you comfortable about me being a solo founder? And then the VC is sitting there and thinking, oh, I guess I was just pattern matching because that's what I'm always doing. And when I see a solo founder, I'm asking about, like, who's your co-founder? But then they actually have to break down their concerns. Like, oh, we might think you don't have the technical chops, or we feel like, and then you can say, oh, I have this advisor, or like, this is actually not a technical game, my dear. Which also, in some cases, if you ask that question, that will debunk the VC's lack of understanding of your business. So that will also tell you, well, maybe you're not the right investor. The other level, if you do consider bringing on someone in the core team, there's multiple levels that you want to look at. The functional level, the skill level, like the technical abilities, like the sales abilities, they're absolutely important. Then there is the personal style, and then there is the life situation, like what do I need in my life right now, right? And so you can look. The nicest metaphor that I have found is like an ensemble, right? So there's like musicality, there's rhythm, there's like the skill of the instrument. It's like, what kind of instrument are you even playing? Does that match our band or our ensemble? Is that the same style? But there are so many levels that you can consider. And in the end, you will never find the perfect person. And it's in the process of knowing, does that sound good? And it can be dissonant at times, but like overall, is this like an interesting piece of music that builds up some dissonance, that resolves, and it's like juicy and it has like the right kind of rhythm? That's how I think about teams.
I love how much dancing there was in that point. It was good. There should be more dancing in all of our points, I think. It was great. Great.
I love that metaphor, actually. I'm definitely gonna reuse that for sure. As a violinist, so it's 100% something I'll reuse for sure.
Okay,
No,
cool. Okay, go on, Tom.
Sorry, Vinay. I was going to ask so just you talk about the second layer, Julius, and you talk about sort of personality fit. My broad assumption is that actually, as we grow the team, I want people who are not like me, because it'll make the whole better. But you talk about having that kind of, like, as you say, knowing that perhaps it's a new ensemble that's been put together, and some people are out of tune at the back, but and some people might be at the tune at the front, to be fair. How would you think about, like, making sure that people are personality fit, but also making sure that you hire not for, I mean, obviously hire for diversity are extremely important, but how do you hire diversely so that you bring in people who are, ultimately I want people who will disagree with me frequently because it'll make us all better.
Yeah, great question. Well, so if you're hiring someone who's just like you, then there's a high likelihood that at least you think you understand each other and you're working with each other and you feel like, oh, we're in, I'm starting this again. We're on one wavelength. Now, if you hire someone who is completely different, then the distance you have to bridge to that person is in the communication, and you're becoming much more aware of what you're sending and what you're receiving, because the glasses of, oh, this is a completely different person, you put them on, right? And there's a risk in that, and there is also a huge bonus in that, because you can, mindfully say, those are the glasses that I have to wear to work with Tom, because he's a lot different than I am. And you just have to be mindful of what the kind of relationship is that the two of you have, and what it needs to be so you can work well together. Because you will need people who are different than you are on your team. Let's say you're a total slacker. You need someone on the team who says, we agreed and we all committed to deliver this by Thursday. And you might not think that is so important because that's maybe not in your value set, but I do. And that's my function on the team. So we perform as a team. And maybe you have a completely different attitude about quality. You're like, but we want to get it perfect. And that person's like, 80-20, but we got to ship it on Thursday. So it's in the communication. And then the other part is you have very different people on the team. So you might need to take on and off the glasses. If you have very similar people on the team, and I've seen that happen before, you think you understand each other, but you don't. Because you think, oh, that person, I went to the same school, known them for years. And then at some point you realize, oh, wow, we're so far apart. And we just didn't realize it because both of us thought we're very similar. So the practice of trying to find out what your relationship needs, one-on-one with everyone on your team and collectively as a team, is something that you should always try to bring to the forefront, no matter how different or similar you are.
One thing I would add there is, if you're thinking about how do you have some sort of gauge for different enough to present that situation that Julius is talking about, but not so different as to basically just be a massive spanner in the works. One really useful thing that has worked for us at Backed and generally I advocate for is doing a values exercise with you and your existing team. Because the thing about, like, when we talk about like culture or affinity, we're usually talking at the surface level of like, oh, we laugh at each other's jokes, so we seem to have a similar sense of humor, or we have like, similar take on this thing. But all of that is surface. And if you like just look for that, you'll end up with people far, far too similar. But if you go down at like enough levels and you get to a point where it's like bringing good energy, and that's what this means, with being an apprentice, or always valuing like ship over, so like, good over perfection, or like those sorts of core answers that you only get when you dig deeply enough, you then get like this is a good rule of thumb, like this is a good red line. And it basically just means that anything above that is fine. So anybody who agrees on this core principle of like whatever it is first, especially if you've done the work of making those like clear, even if that means that there's a word, but there's also a big sentence under it so that you know what you really mean by those terms. It widens the sort of group, I guess, that's possible of fitting within that so much more, that you get lots of different interpretations of those same values. So at the core, there'll still be people who genuinely care about X or Y, or driven by X or Y, but how they have lived and how life has taught them to interpret that or apply that will be really different from you and other people. And that's where you get the like wonderful sort of interstitial tissue of diversity and diversity of thought, but also still having like a commonality that's super important at the base level, where just we get on a deep level, what values mean, and we align with those. So I think that's an exercise worth doing. There are lots of sort of people ops strategists, et cetera, that now offer this as a service. We do it internally with our portfolio. And so I think there's a perception that comes much later. It's a PR exercise, but I think it's worth doing right at the beginning. And so you argue with the core people who are there right now, what do those mean, boil those down, and then filter that through to like, what sort of questions would I ask someone to try and figure out if they really get this on the core, and what am I testing for? And then it means that everybody you hire after that, they seem to be super different, but there's this weird like thread that links them all, and that's what that will be.
You have to encourage yourself to go outside the box as well to get those people. So don't think they're going to exist around you, because they won't, because you'd be surprised that everyone around you in your echo chamber thinks like you. So if you want to build a product that has that different lens, because as you grow, you won't see all the blind spots. And you need to find that person that has lived a different experience so they can see that lens differently from you. But then having the same kind of value and the ways of working, and having the same kind of mission driven to be aligned to you, for you to work with each other. So I would encourage you to even like go outside, and it's all about like, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and putting yourself out there to find those talented people, because don't expect them to find you.
I like it. It's like Lego, I guess. You're like, what do I really mean when I talk about myself or my values, or like, what are the no-goes, and finding that absolutely. Then how do I make sure that the funnel, I guess, of people that I bring in to even be exposed is wide enough that it means that I'm likely to even get like diverse people in which to test against those red line values. And also like, what are the right questions to actually pull that out? And so I'm not asking general nonsense, but really getting to the heart of. And like, it's good to have a few of those. And so, yeah, like I have a few of those. Like I know, for instance, if I told somebody, what would you do after something awful had happened? And if they say anything other than like tell a joke to sort of lower the threshold of sadness, then they're not my people, and that's fine.
Okay, good to know. No, thank you. That's super useful. We'll end. It sounds like we're going to end on something a little softer than metrics, which I quite like.
Well, cool. Does anyone else want to add anything to either the pricing conversation or the co-hiring, or even where we've got to now in terms of understanding what it is you're looking for? I love that Daisy's managed to weave Ikigai into this. And
everybody should learn yourselves.
Yeah. And Julius managed to weave a pretty damn cool music reference into it. Any parting words of wisdom? Any more questions for Tom? Any further advice?
I know we didn't touch on the international expansion bit, and I have so many tips and hints for it, but I will give you one tip actually for that. This is amazing guy called Daniel Glazer. He's like the partner of Wilson Sonsini. If you look up him on LinkedIn, he does the best blogs ever on how to expand to the US, and really thinking about your IP, thinking about landing, prep work. Also to know US is massive. So when you kept saying that to me, I'm like, you need to think about the hotspot where you want to land, and think about like building community, and also being prepared to be, as a founder, going there to do the work. And also maybe thinking about proof of concept contracts before going, to see if there is kind of like a pull need for you. But yeah, we don't have time for that to go into more detail. But last tips.
Oh, thank you for touching on that. That's really logical, I think. Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, I keep cutting you off. My final tip would be to work with a pitch coach, work with a storyteller, a narrative, Like we're quite similar in that we ramble because in our heads we're going down multiple rabbit holes, and so we bring everybody along into those rabbit holes, which is a great way to talk at dinner parties, but is a less great way to pitch your company to people who are time poor and are only half listening. And so I think it's just one of those things worth investing in. And everybody always feels like it's a bougie luxury, and so you won't be encouraged to do it, but just do it. Like spend the money and then become really, really pithy and really succinct. It makes such a difference.
I did it too. It really helps. And just the process of having that extremely helps. Also for your own confidence, because there's one thing that you can be sure about, that you got your story down.
Yeah.
No, that's really good advice. I'm constantly conscious of that. So yeah, I will look that up.
Coolios.
This
Okay.
is such a wholesome one. We were so well behaved. I thought there'd be more ruckus.
What's it usually
But
like?
also we were helpful.
I think we were well behaved because Saloni was here. She's really serious. So.
I'm just paying attention, guys.
This is my concentrating phase.
I'm concentrating really hard.
At one point, I was pretty sure that you've got a background which looks like you sitting there looking in the screen, and you just fuck off somewhere and out enjoying the sun.
It makes you feel like you're saying something smart though, because she's focusing so intently. You're like, oh, I know.
That is actually my face when I'm focusing, and other people think that I'm like super serious and scary because they don't
felt
know.
very affirmed. That was good. That's good. Thank you. Tom,
Alrighty.
do you have any other questions for us? Well, I think we're all now looped in one big
Thank you.
ecosystem. So feel free to message any of us through James or Vinay or directly, and we would be happy to help. And good luck. It sounds like an awesome business. We should definitely be using, because I should be in more papers, I think.
I'm sure we just help with that too.
Especially now, one thing I need to notice is that BACT apparently issues the same pairs of glasses to their employees.
Oh my God. It does.
True. Alex and Pascal have the same, and the two of us have the same, and it's really embarrassing, and we need to have a team meeting about it, but not.
Alrighty. Thank you all for turning up and hanging out with us. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tom.
And,
Thank you guys for the advice. Really appreciate the invite.
Till next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Perfect.
Bye.